Well, I'd say it's been a pretty eventful week.
That's right.
So Nancy Pelosi shows up in Taiwan, and we talked
Gets
about
a royal
this.
treatment.
Gets the royal treatment. Let's see. She had 40 military aircraft in addition to her own, refueling jets, top-of-the-line American fighter jets, and a nuclear aircraft carrier group to escort her. And Biden is saying, oh, we had nothing to do with this. What does that mean?
I think Biden is concerned about ramifications. He probably has a lot more access to critical information.
She's part of the Gang of Seven. They get the same briefings he does, in essence.
Well, maybe.
And I should explain the Gang of Seven. The Gang of Seven are the leaders of the House and the leaders of the Senate. And they have a special level of communication because they represent the legislative branch. She's part of it. As the Speaker of the House, arguably, she's the most important figure on it. So, this ties back to her husband's issues about what she knows and why he's always so successful.
In his picking of stocks.
Yes, amazing. But anyway, she has access to the information that Biden does. So this idea that she didn't know, that she thought, well, much ado about nothing, that is just plain deceitful.
Then, why did she do it? She did it because there are some personal interests involved. She wants to, before her departure at the end of this year, possibly, as Speaker of the House.
There's a 17% chance that she will remain Speaker of the House. And those are the polls on the Democratic side.
Oh, that's not good.
No.
So she would leave legacy of having done something that people didn't want her to do.
But, if she thought she was going to be Rosa Parks or Martin Luther King, that she somehow was leading this charge, it completely backfired. It's hard for me to understand somebody who's been in politics so long, not understanding that she was repudiating a series of agreements that have been in effect for over 50 years.
International agreement committed to, actually.
Yeah.
But what is happening in the Congress can potentially make her trip look like nothing.
Yeah, it's called the Taiwan Deterrence Act. And it is going to pass, and it's going to Biden's desk. And he's, I understand, trying to modify it, but it doesn't matter. The title says it all. The Taiwan Deterrence Act. How can you have an unofficial relationship with an area that you recognize as part of
China,
one country, and you're saying, we have a Deterrence Act. And in it, they intend to treat Taiwan as a NATO partner country.
That's right.
The same as South Korea, Japan, etc. So once again, they're pushing NATO as the policeman of the world, doing America's bidding in Asia.
And also included are various commitments of defending Taiwan.
Yes.
Taiwan Deterrence Act. So this is clearly in violation of the communiques between China and the United States. But even worse than that, it's declaring Taiwan's independence for Taiwan.
Well, Nancy Pelosi stepped on the tarmac and she said that America's determination to protect democracy in Taiwan is ironclad. So that means that they're taking a position on Taiwan. It's official. That is against all three communiques where the U.S. acknowledged that there's no official relationship with Taiwan, and that it is part of China, and that any resolution of the Taiwan issue between the mainland and Taiwan was an internal matter to be handled peacefully. That was it. The U.S. said, okay, we're giving up Taiwan. We're giving you their UN Assembly seat. We are taking away their membership in the UN. In essence, decertifying them as a country and recognizing China. And that was the agreement. And today they are going back on that 180 degrees.
No, I think for the Chinese side, it's very clear. You can have congressional condemnations of China. You can have congressional bitching and complaining about
Those are expressions.
But this is hard act of actually recognizing Taiwan as an independent state, not as part of China. And this is unlike the condemnations and the expressions as you described that we see in Europe. I don't see any European government or members of parliament or parliament in Europe going that far. So US will probably be alone on this one.
You know, I wonder, I mean, right now, Europe is being conspicuously silent on the whole issue.
And absent, yes.
And absent. They're not weighing in. The only ones who weighed in are Australia, Japan. I mean, it's increasingly, this is polarizing. This is, to my mind, exactly what happened in World War I, where the UK was the dominant power, controlled 3/4 of the world. Mm-hmm. And then you had Germany rising, and there was a determination to encircle Germany, which led to them making alliances with other countries, and then eventually led to a situation where war was inevitable because of us. You know, one act triggers another, which triggers another, which triggers the defensive alliance, and then you have war. In each side claiming that the other side is the one who broke the peace.
Well, this time around, I think what is really significant is the joint communique of the ASEAN countries talking about no more provocation.
UN also came out very clearly, said that this was
180 some countries back to China. But I think the most significant fact that had occurred was what happened to Nancy Pelosi when she went to Korea.
That was embarrassing.
That's right. The foreign minister had suddenly taken a trip to the ASEAN countries gathering and so couldn't see her. The president was on holiday at his home in Seoul.
Well, it's so difficult to get from Seoul to Seoul, right?
That's right. Yeah. To my office.
Yes. Oh, the airport is far away.
That's right.
No, but I mean, from my perspective, yes, they don't want to get dragged into this situation. More importantly, you know, on the 27th, all right, of July, Nancy Pelosi shepherded through a bill through Congress that will give $67 billion in direct subsidies and tax breaks to any firm, American firms, building chip plants
in the U.S.
All right. So let's look at, and in addition to that, $36 billion a year for the next 5 years for research.
Right.
So now, does China sell America a lot of chips? No. Does Taiwan? Yes. 90% of the chips used, high-end chips used in the U.S., the ones that would be made at these new factories subsidized by the U.S. are going to be taking away from the Taiwanese market. So I think it takes a lot of gall to show up in a country where you've just declared economic war on them.
That's right.
The chip exports are 40% of Taiwan's exports, 15% of their total GDP. So tell me how it is that you can pass a bill like this and then 6 days later show up and say, we stand with you.
That's right. I mean, and then go to Korea too. Korea doesn't want to be part of this.
Well, Korea is also being attacked. They have Samsung.
That's right.
This is a direct attack on Samsung and also the Japanese chip makers.
Yeah, but the Koreans is even more significant because nearly 50% of their chips are manufactured in multi-billion-dollar factories in China.
Of course. And the U.S. wants to pressure them to say, and they've already sent envoys saying, look, you got to be part of the 4-chip alliance.
That's right.
Yeah. 4 countries that make chips who are supposed to hand over their chip making capacity to the United States for safekeeping. Meanwhile, their economies will be further hollowed out They won't. What are they going to do in their countries? If they hand
TSMC, I was speaking to some senior engineers in TSMC because of my previous activities in the sector. And
My
they
previous
told me,
activities, let's be clear about this.
No.
You were on the board of Applied Materials.
Yeah.
You were head of the investment committee, which brought you into direct contact with all of these people.
And it's quite interesting because they talked about, number one, the cost of building a factory in the US will be 4 to 5 times the cost of building one in Asia.
And that's not just China.
That's
That's
right.
anywhere in Asia.
In Asia.
Yeah.
And then in terms of labor costs, if you can get the labor, which is unlikely because shortages of engineers and scientists.
They won't hire anybody from
China
Taiwan,
or China.
Japan, South Korea, or China.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you can get labor, labor cost is 3 times higher.
So the takeaway from this is that this is not only an attack on China. China is being used as the reason, but the fact is this is an economic attack on all of Asia.
That's right.
Advanced country Asia.
Advanced technology countries.
Under the theory that it's not safe to keep it in your country, keep it in ours. We'll take the jobs. Don't worry.
We'll print money to do it.
We'll print money to do it. But I mean, are we? So far, I have not heard anybody talking about this. Why?
I suspect for those who are in the sector, they don't think it's going to happen.
It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money that would go to a number of companies whose share prices have gone up a lot. Mr. Pelosi.
Okay. Yeah, but let's be honest here. The total Taiwanese investment in China over all these years, $71 billion.
Mm-hmm.
The U.S. government is going to give away $67 billion in the next couple of years. That has to have an impact.
It will have an impact. It will lead to basically these factories or these fabs built in the U.S. becoming non-competitive because their cost basis is just too high.
But I would expect Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea to respond with their own subsidies. So in essence, what you have is a subsidy war.
Yeah.
Who can pour more money into their plants, all right, and into their corporations.
But then that's only the capital side. But in terms of operations and chip manufacturing, the cost basis and efficiency and so on and so forth means that if you built them in the US, you will simply not be competitive.
Let's take the other way around. So they have targeted 15 plants, chip-making plants, for the US. Who are they going to sell to? They're cutting themselves off from their markets in China.
In Asia.
I really don't see Japan saying that instead of being a net exporter of chips, we're going to be a net importer of American chips that are more expensive than our chips. I can't see Taiwan doing that, period, because they only
Korea
export,
for that matter.
or South Korea for that matter. So where are all
American companies.
American companies doing what? They're making things with a cost basis that could be 4 to 5 times higher from the capital side, and then probably at least 3 to 4 times higher from the
Production
operation side, because you have to pay engineers in the US more than you pay them in Asia. So it doesn't seem to make sense. Then you add in this NATO element, where they're now saying we're going to back up our play.
That's why, Einar, many of us think it's just not going to happen. It's just a big song and dance, a big show, and a lot of this money is pork for U.S. companies, right?
Undoubtedly, it's pork.
Yeah.
But the issue is, once you take this pork and you start getting people to believe that somehow America is going to be number one in chip production, and that if they're not number one, somebody must be cheating. Because this is the narrative on China. Every time China succeeds, it's never because of the hard work, all right, or the ingenuity. It's always because they did something wrong, right? And this is going to double down. Now that if Taiwan is declared a NATO partner, that is serious. I mean, apart from throwing away the basis of the relationship between the U.S. and China, now NATO has a role in Asia, a new Ukraine, where they can say, okay, anything happens to Ukraine,
Okay.
we're all in.
When Pelosi was going to come to Taiwan, was going to visit Taiwan, there was an uproar in China. And there were talk of shooting down the plane and the jet fighters company and so on and so forth. Nobody anticipated what the Chinese government would do.
But they said what they were going to do.
They say we're going to do something and you're going to bear some consequences. But they didn't follow her plane. They didn't track it with jet fighters. They didn't do any of that because that would clearly be in violation of international law. You can't shoot down.
Well, also you have 3 different air forces up in the air, and the
That's
chances
right.
of something
Yeah.
bad happening are really great.
That's right.
40
So
U.S.
the Chinese
fighters,
government-
and how many ever from Taiwan, and then
69 from China or something.
Yeah.
But whatever the case, they didn't do any of those things. They declared on the first day of the visit, military exercises that completely encircles Taiwan.
Yeah, but I've been on a number of shows where the State Department people have been saying, well, China's overreacting. This is the narrative from Washington. China's overreacting. She just went there. Why are you making such a big deal about it? And you hear this also from Australian programs. Lucian, the CGTN anchor, went on, and this guy was like, well, what's the big deal? Just some lady stopping by Taiwan. Why are you so upset?
This is the first step. The second step is this Taiwan Deterrence Act. What all of this is headed to is very clear. I'm really curious what Chinese government has planned.
Well, for this next step, I mean, Nancy Pelosi, that was an abrogation. She did it verbally.
That's right.
This is a written document by the Congress. I don't see that Biden, he doesn't have the political courage to say this is nonsense, you can't do this, interference in the executive. I don't think he has the guts to veto. I mean, he didn't have the guts to veto her, even though he knew that this was going to be a disaster. So right now, I mean, in Washington, they're clearly saying, oh, China's upset, but they'll calm down. They'll come to reason.
Let them think so.
I don't see it.
Because this encirclement, the military exercises encirclement, means the Chinese military not only fired missiles across Taiwan airspace, but have also sent ships and jet fighters.
You mentioned this last time, that you thought that this was going to be one of the main acts that, because in the past...
New normal, baby.
New normal. But just so people understand, in the past, although Taiwan is part of China, Taiwan respected the midline between Taiwan and mainland China in the Straits. They didn't fly over it, all right? And the Taiwanese didn't fly over it.
That's right.
Now China has flown over it, and they've also sailed over it. So that gate is broken.
To within 12 miles.
Yeah.
12 nautical miles of Taiwan.
It's hard to believe that Washingtons get that China's upset about this, and that this is not a talk shop. It's a red line, and they don't seem to see it that way. They see it's, maybe they don't mean it. And this is what I mean by sleepwalking into war.
It's one thing about what Washington people would think, they don't mean it, they'll back down, they'll be okay. But I think it's even more significant is that the political momentum in the US is such that the politics being played is driving them in the direction of this. If they continue this way, it's going to lead to war. But I think China would take very, very harsh steps if this is passed. We are going to blockade Taiwan. We're going to complete...
But that plays, in a manner of speaking, it can be a very strong statement by China, but it'll play directly into the U.S. narrative, which is that, China is taking the hard stance. Now they've interfered with trade in the area. This is what we were telling you they're going to do. So I'm not certain that that's the way. I think definitely putting the onus on the American consumer, 20% duties on all Chinese
exports.
things going to the U.S., I think that would send a much stronger message. Already, since we talked last, the number of people who are putting inflation at the top end has grown by another 3%. In addition to that, the number of people who think the country is going in the wrong direction. Now, if you look at what people are concerned with, Taiwan isn't on the list. So I think it'd be very hard for
most Americans.
Most Americans, we say here, is Taiwan. You added 2-3% inflation on money I don't have, where every month I'm losing money because my wages go up by 5% and my costs are going up by 10%.
I think the strategy you described is very correct. Whether or not to put duties on Chinese exports to the United States, that's something that we have to think about, because China has been very much against the unilateral political sanctions that the U.S. is imposing on people all over the world.
This isn't political. This is economic, because the U.S. has destroyed the basis of the political relationship.
Yeah.
I mean, if you respond in kind, if the U.S. pokes you, pokes China, and you respond, they're in control. But if you go outside the box and you hit them where it's going to hurt the most politically, with elections coming up, all right, that I think is the only message that you'll get across to the U.S. and also other countries, that this is going to cost you if you want a grandstand in Taiwan.
Yeah, especially this anti-inflation act that was just passed.
Oh, what do you make of that? I mean,
more pork.
Yeah, exactly. The answer to everything is just not enough pork.
That's
not enough rich people getting a little bit richer.
And not enough passing the bucks with helicopter flying in money to get people to vote.
It seems unreal that in 8 years they've added $10 trillion to the budget.
Right.
It's now at 30. It used to be at 20. And now the only option they have is to add more. Where are they going to go?
Coming back to this act, would it lead to some European countries like the UK doing similar things?
I don't think really anyone cares about the UK. I mean, they can't control their inflation. Their Chancellor of the Exchequer has come out and said, no, the Bank of England has come out and said, hold on to your socks. It's not going to get better for a couple of years.
That's right.
Not what the politicians wanted to hear, obviously. But
so you think it would be really a U.S. thing, and then
no, they're going to join on. Australia is obviously,
maybe
chomping
Japan.
at the bit to do it. Japan, no, not the economic side for them is not good.
No.
And they also have this issue of this attack on their economy by the U.S. by subsidizing their companies. This is going to add more pressure on Japan to maintain the competitiveness of their companies. They have to respond with subsidies. What else can you do? You're not going to go to war with the U.S. Japan, you have 50,000 U.S. troops on your southern.
Other than economic, like tariffs, what else can China do?
Further downgrade
Diplomatic relations.
Withdraw some things. I mean, right now you have American companies who are enjoying, hundreds of billions of dollars of sales here. Mm-hmm. They have something to protect. And I think once it's clear that the relationship is heading the wrong direction, they're going to call their congressmen and their senators and said, Congressman, Senator, you know who I am? Yeah, you know how many people I employ? Well, you continue on this road with China, we're going to lose our market there. That means they're going to have to cut big-time salary jobs at headquarters and other places by about 20%.
And the Europeans will be happy to take over the market.
Exactly. And this is something that I don't think that they've figured out.
And given also what happened with the Pelosi visit, we've seen the social media in China is now very, very vibrant. It's absolutely virile when it comes to these issues. How about boycott of American goods?
It could have a huge impact.
Yeah.
Everything from Ben & Jerry's ice cream to Coca-Cola,
Starbucks.
all the cosmetic and soap companies, things like that. I mean, people don't realize, I mean, the most popular brand of water heater in China is an American.
Really?
Joint venture, yeah. I know, because it was a Wisconsin company.
But all of this will be exposed. People will come up with lists of American joint ventures and American
GM.
companies.
All right.
GM.
Yeah. GM cars. I mean, this is not going to be good. People are going to see it. All right. I think we've covered this one. Donald Trump, house has been raided by the FBI.
Wow.
Pictures of pieces of paper that he was trying to flush down the toilet. I mean, you couldn't get a reality show that's better than this. I have no idea what it means, but I can tell you, based on Garland's previous hesitancy to do anything, this is really serious. I mean, you don't go into an ex-president's home and open up his safe.
As he described it, knock down the door and also to open up the safe.
You know, he was not at his home. He was in Bedminster, New Jersey, but still. I guess we're going to talk about this next week.
Oh, yes.
India moves to restrict inexpensive Chinese smartphones. I mean,
how stupid can you get?
Is inflation a problem in India? I think so. Are they going to have enough food? Yes. So, of all the things you could be doing, making people pay more for cell phones. I mean, these are the inexpensive cell phones, not bought by, they're not restricting Apple cell phones. They're restricting inexpensive Chinese cell phones.
I recall
things poor people.
Yeah, I recall something that a very senior member of the African Union said to me. We have to be thankful for our rapid development in the last decade to Shenzhen. I said, why Shenzhen? He said, only Shenzhen can produce these $45 smartphones, which allow us to have education, information exchange, and banking and communication like we never had before. This is why the last decade, Africa has seen phenomenal growth. It's because of this.
What has the U.S. added to the mix? What has Europe added to the mix?
Nothing.
Well, there we go.
What did India add to the mix? And I think in terms of India, this become, again, it's political. This is a democracy here because protection of their domestic manufacturers.
But they don't have domestic manufacturing capable of taking up the market space that they're pushing China out of.
It's really silly. They're hoping that some of their domestic manufacturers can be up to the task. But it's not so simple. The reason they could be $45 smartphones is because of scale. Economies of scale, efficiency, manufacturing, supply chain, all of those things.
Let's take this back a second. So first the Indians said no imported Chinese cell phones. Mm-hmm. So Chinese makers moved their factories to India and started employing Indians not to make the chips, all right, but to assemble the phones. Now they're moving to say, we don't want those phones. We want them to be assembled by our people. But guess where the parts are made?
All components are shipped in from China.
Yeah, I really don't understand where any of this things goes, but I'm sure it's tied up. There's this sense within India that China is on its, it is engrossed in its situation with the U.S. and that this is the time to put pressure on China.
This is one part, but the other part is that India is doing everything it can, including on the military side with the Americans. You heard about this military exercise 90 kilometers from the Chinese border. They would do anything to retard China's continuous advancement.
Yeah, but where is this all leading? Having military exercises by Americans who aren't afraid of U.S. invading the U.S. I mean, the U.S. is not afraid of China invading the United States. Yeah. And to put these people on the Indian border. Well,
But
it's hard to see it any other way.
But in terms of retarding China's development, you're hurting yourself in the process more than hurting the Chinese.
It's just like the tariffs. 95% borne by the American consumer, 5% by China. I don't know how long you can continue with that. I'm going to hurt you. Only 5% you, 95% me. At some point, your willingness for pain, as the American consumers are finding out. And things. And Biden still hasn't cut
the tariffs.
And he's staring at a number which would reduce inflation by 1.3% by an independent consulting agency that no one has disputed.
That's right.
I noticed that.
When Peterson Institute came out with that study, a number of top economists and financial institutions, chief economists, all supported that number. And they even say it could be 1.5%.
It was 1.3 to 1.5, but I mean, it's tough. Do we have anything more to add about Shinzo Abe and his legacy? I believe that we're both part of the Taiwan Institute, senior fellows, and I believe that their upcoming issue of TIO magazine is going to be about that. I'll be very interested. We'll have some comments on that as we go forward. Monkeypox, completely out of the blue. The problem I have with monkeypox is that they declared it emergency. Not that it isn't an emergency, but now you have this kind of equivalency, monkeypox and COVID-19.
They're totally different.
And they're totally different, and the severity is different. How you get it is different. It has to be through contact.
Transmittal is totally two different worlds.
Yes, and I worry that people are, on one hand, they think that pandemics, they declare them all the time. I can't get them. This is all nonsense.
And there are some issues on political correctness in terms of description of communication.
Yes, because, one community was affected more by other, but you can't discuss that because that would be politically incorrect. The fact is that anybody watching should be very aware that this is a danger and that it is communicated by touch. It doesn't come through the air. U.S. Inflation Reduction Act passes. We were talking about $300 billion commitment towards climate change. Toothless corporate pork.
When I read this, I couldn't get it. What does investment in climate change impact on inflation? How does that tie in?
Look, don't get involved in the details. When there's pork to be had, grab it. It's just,
Forget the name.
Well, it's like, we're going to give $40 billion to support Ukraine. Well, sort of, to a lot of American companies who are American entities, including the government funding themselves and the State Department to give them more money to do that. BlackRock opens the door to Bitcoin. Previously, Chairman Larry Fink called Bitcoin, quote, index of money laundering, unquote. That was 2017. I guess 2022 is a whole different line. Do you understand? I mean, Bitcoin has lost 70% of its value. And BlackRock, one of the biggest names out there, and you know a bunch of those guys. I'd be really interested.
Larry a long time ago.
Yeah, I bet you would be dying to hear your next conversation with them about, hey guys, what's up?
Well, I think Jamie Dimon's comment was really suitable. This is the the end of last year.
Yeah.
He's, JP Morgan Chase. He said, for me, Bitcoins are worth nothing, zero. But if someone wants to trade it, I'm happy to take the fees.
Okay, but this is a really good example of the difference between what can happen in America and what couldn't happen in China. Because if a Chinese entrepreneur of his level was to say that, the government,
jail.
Well, he's basically, I'm going to conspire to commit fraud against people.
Against the People's Bank.
As long as they're willing to pay me money, I'll do anything. But right. I mean, the government in China would say, look, no, we're not going to have this kind of speculative things. And they've already said no to Bitcoin, cryptocurrencies.
But I think the suspicion is BlackRock, senior BlackRock partners, as well as possibly a number of its funds actually hold cryptocurrencies.
Wouldn't that be interesting to see if they hold cryptocurrencies and they're hyping the market so they can make an exit?
They can dump.
They can dump. This is the old pump and dump. I guess we'll have to see, but just amazing.
Elon Musk did it perfectly last year, right?
Doggy coin.
Yeah.
All right. Well, for China, let's talk a little bit about China. Sanya locks down. China stands firm on COVID-19. But Sanya was a very special thing. Everybody was going to Sanya. Everyone I knew from Shanghai, from Beijing, from everywhere said, where do you go? Well, the only place we can go is Sanya. I thought that perhaps that was a danger zone. People invited me and I said, absolutely not. I think it's like playing Russian roulette, except 2 of the chambers are loaded instead of 1.
Maybe 3.
Maybe 3. But I mean, it's serious. About 80, 90,000 people
are locked down.
Yeah. And I don't know how long it's going to take, but I noticed that Hong Kong has gone a different way.
The joke has been that it's the people who were locked down in Shanghai who's gone to Shenyang. It's not going to go over well. But it shows that there, contrary to this idea that there is a ironclad way in which China handles things, it's actually left up a lot to the local authorities to not only declare emergencies, but then how to handle it. I don't mean that they make all the right decisions. I mean that it's not contrary to what everyone thinks. The latest information that I've been able to pick up is that the government is planning to loosen up travel restrictions quite a bit in the next 3 to 4 months. Yeah. And part of that is the number of ICU beds.
There's a big push on, my understanding, to make more ICU beds available, the kind that could handle it.
All over the country.
Yeah.
All over the country. That was the issue before, where you simply don't have enough ICU beds. If you let it loose, if you let it go, the number of people who will be occupying ICU beds in percentage terms will be 600% of the number of beds available.
Yeah.
And
you'd literally have people dying on the sidewalks or outside the hospitals because they wouldn't be able to get onto respirators and things like this.
And then what about other people who needed, without COVID, who needed ICU treatment?
But tell me something. I mean, China takes a people first. They say life is important. It's sacred. We're going to protect things, especially the elderly population.
That's right.
Other countries, different cultures, they say, well, old people die all the time. And, it's just the way it is, and we shouldn't mess up the economy for them. But for some reason, China is vilified for that.
Yeah.
And ironically, a lot of people who talk about, abortion, how that's killing babies and the right to life and everything, the same ones who said, but I don't have to wear a mask.
That's right.
And I don't have any responsibility to these old people and things like that. God will take care of them.
God will.
Yeah, not in a good way.
But in China's case, I think it's very well planned. If you start building, and when they get into the building binge, they can do it very, very quickly.
Yeah.
ICU beds.
Well, it's good for China, period, because
they need it anyway.
Yeah. And now in a lot of these remote areas where they really didn't have much, they will at least have something. But they're also approving Paxlovid and some other medications so that even if you haven't had a vaccine, if you do in fact get sick, they have treatment options. Yeah. And now they have treatment places.
That's right.
So I think it's a little bit slower moving than I would anticipate, but it seems like they're moving in the right direction.
The basic direction is, number one, identify and actually start using treatment. Number two, build en masse facilities that can accommodate. Mm-hmm. And then third is shots.
Vaccines.
Vaccination. Yeah.
I agree with that. All right, real estate. Chinese sector, first time in 8 months, new housing prices logged a decline in
0.something%.
100 city average. Not much, very small.
Very small.
But then you start hearing that in Beijing, to housing developers who are having problems have been extended loans that will get through this tough period.
Housing has been housing construction has been such an important growth element in China's economic development. You can't allow to have a collapse. But President Xi has been saying now for 2 years, houses are for living in, not for speculation.
I still maintain that what they want to do overall is to maintain the housing prices, but allow inflation and disposable income to rise so that it starts making sense and young people can, in fact, afford homes. Because you can't, if you lower the values, people might start walking away from their mortgages.
That's right.
I mean, you're already seeing people walking away from mortgages for these houses that they were sold on a dream.
Yeah.
And but that could have serious consequences because the banks are involved.
The banks are involved. We will see the formation. I think it's well in process of local government setting up financial institutions to take over.
Exactly what they did in Hainan.
Yeah.
They have a bad asset disposal
That's right.
Entity.
And this will happen all over the country. Initially is at the local level, like in Hainan province. Each province, well, most of the province will build such a thing, but probably by the end of the year, a national organization will be set up to handle the assets.
That's very much par for the course in terms of the way China looks at things.
I don't remember the year when China was cleaning up its banks. They did the good bank and bad bank thing.
Yeah, each of the major banks got a separate bad bank.
That's right.
Yes,
Asset management.
Yeah, I remember Great Wall Asset Management was the one for the agricultural bank. They had some hits and misses there, but I think they've learned a lot since that time.
And how to handle it.
Yeah, that was similar to America's saving and loan crisis back in the 70s. Yeah. That was quite something.
But in this case, at least there is much hard asset involved.
Yeah.
This is mortgages.
Yeah. This is real stuff. China's capital market creaks open wider with game-changer law to slash transaction costs for over-the-counter derivatives. China is basically normalizing the cost for these derivatives. Do you think China is going forward with a full capitalization where you can basically have all the same tools that you have everywhere else?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I think, once again, it'll be the watchful eye of government making sure that these are not allowed to be as Ponzi schemes or just simply ways of taking people's money.
That's right.
They're not getting anything of real value.
That's right.
I don't know that people really understand options here. That's really, I believe options on a primary level where you basically say, I need to offset some risk in this. For instance, I need oil and I'm going to buy oil futures. I think that's very
commodities.
Good. When you have 6 layers of options, which are basically, I bet it's going to happen this way. And
subprime.
Subprime. That's when you start getting, when the complexity of the transactions are not based on anything real. They're simply based on bets being made by different parties.
I'm absolutely convinced the government will not allow that to really take off. I would agree. Because it's derivatives on derivatives on derivatives. And even the most sophisticated economists will have to read it 15 times to understand what some of these guys on Wall Street can come up with.
Yeah. No, they come up with this way of making fees.
That's right.
Getting people to pay them.
That's right.
Or the rat in the cheese. Yeah. Small businesses, they're looking at alternatives to deal with the pandemic, but also to get financing. Do you see any kind of progress in that?
I wish I could see a lot more progress in that.
Yeah, I think it's really hard.
It's really hard because bankers are trained to be risk
avoid
averse.
Risk. This is the funny thing. Everyone thinks that bankers are these smart people who can measure risk and decide whether this is a good loan or a bad loan.
No.
Actually, they're trained the exact opposite. Just say no.
That's right.
Unless there's no way to say no.
Unless it's SOE.
If you don't need money, I want to lend to you. Now, if you do need money, please go somewhere else.
That's right.
Yeah.
So the transformation of the banking sector is really going to take some time.
I still see it as something that's going to be part of the digitalization revolution.
Yeah.
The ability to use a complex set of matrix and data to determine whether or not the business idea is good in itself.
Independently rather than subjectively.
Exactly.
Which has been the problem, because bankers subjectively, like you said, are risk averse to the point of saying no to everything. Yeah.
I think there's going to be a lot of bankers who are going to be out of jobs. Getting back to small businesses, exports hit a record high.
Another record.
And the trade surplus hit
another record.
How long can this last? And is this the hope for small businesses, the ancillary services that go along with all these exports?
I don't think so. Yeah. Not directly. Because directly, most of the exports are run by SOEs or transnationals. Because the supply chain is becoming so sophisticated, it's very difficult for small, medium-sized companies to participate, except downstream in the supply chain. What the Chinese government hopefully can encourage is more domestic consumption because of exports rise.
It's the same, it's the chicken and the egg. Unless people have increasing disposable income and employment, it's very hard to get them to start spending.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the answer is, but this is something we have to keep following, because it's really important. How do you get these small, medium-sized enterprises backfiring on all cylinders? 90% of new jobs.
That's right, 90% of new jobs, and also social stability.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's not like the U.S. in terms of people hitting the streets, but definitely you have a big group of younger people who are not able to enter the workforce.
Oh, speaking of which, you're the expert.
Oh.
American lawyer. There was a report I read somewhere that California is no longer criminal if you had committed a crime of taking under $1,000 or something like that.
Oh, that was a while back, but now that they were refusing to prosecute. It wasn't there was a law. They were refusing to prosecute if it was under a certain number. And that was during the pandemic period and things like that. But now in San Francisco, the city attorney who wasn't, saying I'm not going to prosecute has been thrown out. So I think that kind of
leniency.
Yeah, well, it was ridiculous. I mean, it was obviously played for political purposes, but they had people going into shops and just taking things and then just walking out, knowing full well that they could not be prosecuted. So, I mean, it didn't make sense. I mean, if somebody's stealing from somebody, you can't just say, oh, that's okay, right? You may not, you don't put them in jail for 10 years, but there has to be some sort of way of preventing
punishment.
People.
That's
yeah,
right.
There's got to be a punishment, and you have to deter people from doing this kind of action.
But once you allow this to happen once.
Well, you're basically saying it's okay to riot.
That's right.
Except you can have your personal riot. You can just say, I'm unhappy. I'm going to go down to 7-Eleven, and I'm not going to pay for my smokes or my crisps or my Coca-Cola. I'm just going to take it. Because these weren't people who were taking, food. They were just taking anything that they saw of value that they wanted.
I remember it was Dior shops, Christian Dior, and LV shops.
Well, that was more than $1,000. Those were organized gangs that were striking simultaneously at high-end stores, breaking down the windows, going into these places. And the police, had a choice of where to respond to. But it was happening so quickly, and it was so well organized. It seemed like just people all of a sudden gathered there, and then they broke in and took it. But later on, they discovered. But I haven't heard of any convictions or anything.
No.
Things. So China is taking multiple actions to oppose Chip 4 alliance, as we were talking about. What do you think China is going to do?
I don't think China has to do a lot.
I'd agree.
Because the Koreans will not
Well, I think they know this is a trap. And not only Korea, I don't think Japan's going to support
Or
it.
Taiwan.
Or Taiwan.
Yeah.
Especially with that bill that went through.
That's right.
Impossible. Gen Z. China is having a gap, generation gap. Is it real? I mean, one child, they say, oh, they've never had any hardships, and they all about the aesthetics, how it looks, type of thing. The selfie, whether it's certain kinds of sneakers and shoes, and even tattoos now. But on the other side, also Hanfu, the Chinese
design
clothing that is very reminiscent or takeoffs from traditional Chinese clothing.
From Han Dynasty. Yeah.
I remember when we were young, our elders said we would amount to nothing, that we would destroy the world. In some respects, that could still come true. But I mean, the generation gaps have been there for a long time. And I don't know.
If you look at a number of the companies which have gone IPO'd in the last couple of years, the focus is really very much on Gen Z as a consumer. Yeah. For example, this company called Pop Art.
Yes.
What does it sell? Little toys.
Inspired figurines from
whatever
television, movies, exactly. Video games.
Or Genki Forest.
Yeah.
New
kinds of beverages.
For Gen Z. And these are companies which end up with tens of billions in valuation.
Yeah.
And they do sell very well. So these are not types of things that, let alone our generation, but a generation after us will really look at.
I think every generation has to make its own statement. Yeah. And I think it's sometimes, I think you have to make an effort to understand it. You can't group them all together. I mean, a few years ago, it was the lie down. Remember?
It
says, oh, they don't want to do anything. I think there's always, within the growth of middle classes, there's always, the children become slightly disaffected because they have so many choices, yet they feel so many pressures.
Yeah.
I mean, saying, this kind of car and this jewelry and this restaurant, it all takes money. The question is, how do you earn it? And that can put a lot of pressure on people because they want the status that their parents gave them. They want to maintain it, but sometimes it's hard. So they go in different directions.
They do, like in our generation as well.
Yeah. People
have gone to different directions, right? Mm. Those who went and got MBAs versus those who went and got JDs, right? But I think Gen Z is a very interesting generation because not only would they be able to go in different directions, but also access to information is something that our generations never had.
Yeah. So I think there's plenty of room to work with the younger generation and use their strengths as opposed to complaining about their differences. Yeah. We'll see what happens. Elon Musk, has he worn out his welcome with his childlike behavior, which is eclipsing his genius? I mean, I remember that line from Casablanca. I'm shocked. Rick, we're closing your casino. Why? I'm shocked to find there gambling going on here. And then the man comes up to him and says, to the police officer saying that, here you're winning, sir. Oh, yes, thank you. I mean, you had fraudulent accounts? Everybody knew. It was well documented. All right? Here's a guy who's sophisticated, who's supposed to, he's a multi-billionaire. He's one of the smartest people on earth.
And richest on earth today.
Yeah, and he says, oh, I'm shocked. Did you do any due diligence? I think he's going nowhere. And I think in October, there's going to be an October surprise for Elon Musk, and it's not going to be a good one if he goes to...
You think so?
Oh, if he goes to trial, the judges will say, well, you're a sophisticated investor. Did you do any due diligence? No, we just believed them. Oh, really? Where did they make, all these things? Why didn't you do due diligence? Do you buy houses without seeing them? Anyways, I don't think it's going to go well for him, but I do wonder if people are tiring of his antics. I mean, as bright as brilliant as he is, as clearly as he sees things, and his ability to make things happen, he just seems mercurial. His
There are two sides to
his
him.
life is a
There are two
mess.
sides. Exactly. His brilliance is vision. But at the same time, he's also brilliant at playing the public, playing the media.
Well, I don't think getting
Playing-
sued for $44 million is getting play in the public.
That's right.
That seemed like impulse control issues.
Yeah.
The same as in his private life. I mean, he's, we won't
Little
go into
messy.
that. I don't care what people do in their own private lives, but it is an indication of sometimes lack of self-control if you have too many children with too many different people who you don't really have much connection with otherwise. All right. Republican CPAC, that's the Conservative Action Committee of the Republican Party, hosted Viktor Orban, okay, who had made a very...
Name for himself.
I mean, yes, he's made a name for himself. He also made a statement that he doesn't believe in mixed races. He thinks it's a really bad idea, things like this. You know, this is kind of going back to Hitler and all sorts of other people who've said that they oppose any kind of mixing of the races and things like that. But he's welcomed as a hero at CPAC. Is the Republican Party going full out, white supremacist?
I think much of America is going in that direction. The polarization based
Much
on
of
race.
it? 33%? I'd put it at about 32%. Surprisingly, about the same number who favor Donald Trump.
The polarization based on race has been occurring.
Well, we experienced it.
That's right. For quite some time. It's been subtly undercover because of political correctness.
Yeah, but I mean, when
this is
the
one
solid
way to
majority
do
of
it.
Americans were white, I don't think it was as big an issue, except for racism against blacks, Asians, etc. I mean, there was racism, but now it seems to be coupled with fear that those people are taking over. We don't want any more immigrants.
Anti-immigration, and also the description of how America will become a non-white country in 10 years or 15 years or something.
But this is being openly said.
That's right.
At, there's two major parties in a two-party system. And, you hear constantly.
Third party being formed.
Yes. Do you give that any hope?
Not much.
Not much either. But, I mean, I'm always interested. China Communist Party, despite whatever they achieve, is consistently, all right, hit for anything they do or stand for.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They don't get up and make racist statements. You have the Republican Party, as represented by this conservative action wing, making the openly racist statements, welcoming in openly racist people, right? Why doesn't China comment on this?
Internal affairs of another country.
I know, but I mean, it just seems
They
a
didn't
little
comment.
low-hanging fruit that you'd have somebody.
Maybe they should comment on that.
Yeah.
But it's just like
Well, I don't know that government can comment, but I would be expecting
media,
more of the media to be open and questioning why. I'd ask them, why are you, if the Chinese government said these racist things, what would you say? If the communist government was saying this about anybody, what would you say?
Yeah. China is not very sophisticated in playing the international media.
Okay, so over 107,000 people died because of the
Opiate.
opiate addiction. Not just the Sackler family, but others benefited. But it seems that they're going to get away with it. I mean, how is it
pay
possible?
A small fine.
Well, it's the equivalent of taking a 737 and crashing it every day. Okay? Because this is 1 year we're talking about. So why isn't anybody seemingly concerned about this? I mean, there's nothing really happening in Congress. Where's the move to protect the people? The Sacklers are being badmouthed and things like that, but they're going to still be able to retain a large part of their fortune.
I think there is this feeling in America that those who died from it deserve to die.
They're weak.
They're weak. They're useless.
How about that conservative talk show host who was addicted to opioids and was always going on about, he was the radio host who was always going on about how both her mother's on crack and things like this, and describing them. I mean, they caught him. He had multiple false prescriptions by non-existent doctors, and his claim was, gee, I had back pain, you should understand it. He continued with his radio hosting until I think he just passed away recently.
Einar, this, even though if you go by humanitarian terms, human terms, it's horrendous, it's horrible. But in terms of America, it's a minor issue compared to all the other stuff that's going on.
But this casual idea that we're going to blame people for allowing things like this to happen. I mean, it just doesn't seem, I mean, if you have a government...
It doesn't seem right.
Well, if you have a government, they're there to provide order and protect
society. To address these issues.
I mean, there used to be a big consumer rights things. I mean, I just don't understand how you can have something so evil, all right, happening under your very nose, and everyone seems to be sweeping it under the carpet. Just doesn't seem possible.
Maybe the Sacklers are tied into Rupert Murdoch.
When
you wouldn't be surprised.
You may well say, but I couldn't possibly comment. Oh, okay. Friendshoring. Where are we? We're gonna talk about this every week, because this is a fascinating idea. You're either with me or against me.
That's right.
If you're my friend, you're against China, and we can work together. It doesn't matter what your politics are or anything like that. It doesn't matter even if you're a democracy. But if you're a friend, we could work together. But that means against China.
That's what it means to break up the supply chain which has been built, that's benefited the whole world for the last decade.
It doesn't work.
Friendshoring will not work. Because number one, to start with, friendshoring may not have the capacity to do shoring.
Like in India.
That's right, exactly.
And cheap cell phones. Where are you going to get your cheap cell phone?
Yeah.
Well, I'll buy all the parts from Shenzhen, where I used to buy the phone, and then I'll put a new casing together, put it together here. But since I'm an Indian company, it's a new brand, and you can buy it from me.
That's the first part. There's no shoring place. Number two, friend shoring. Your friends may not be very happy about the shoring.
As in Taiwan, South Korea, and Taiwan, and Japan, with their quote, come to us or else.
So you have these two friend shoring, you have these two things, both of which in most cases will not work. Yeah. So 1 minus 1 plus minus 1.
But okay, so let's look at some common themes here. The military is gaining. I mean, if I had a military that was doing as badly as the U.S., the last thing I would be doing is increasing their budget. That's already the largest in the world. Yeah, it's larger than the next 10 in the world. Yeah. The problem is we're just not giving them enough money.
That's right.
But then you also have the pharmaceutical companies, right? And they're benefiting.
It's mafia.
Right, okay. Then we just talked about our friends over at Intel and all the rest, and how they're going to get a big bonus in their things. Their stock market price is going up, not because anything they did, simply because they're going to be given money.
That's right.
Right. So who's running the country? The special interests or the politicians?
I think special interests through the politicians.
Politicians are owned by special interests.
Exactly.
And they just did away, the Supreme Court did away with this idea that you shouldn't be able to give unlimited money because you're wealthy to the candidate or party of your choice in order to affect it.
As much as you want.
Yeah, give as much as you want. There are 2 millionaires in Texas. There was an article about them.
Right.
They're, in essence, cleaning the ground of anybody who opposes them. If you are with them, all right, you're either for me or against me.
Yeah.
If you're for them, you're okay. You get money, you get votes. But if you're against me, I'm going to get rid of you. I'll run somebody against you. I mean, is this toxic, the idea that a few men can decide the political fate of everybody in a state as large as Texas?
This happens everywhere in democratic society.
Is that the weakness of it? Special interests?
Special interests, those with money. Even in India, I've heard of, when I was visiting India, I've seen cases in which specific dollar amounts are put to votes.
Yeah.
By votes.
Sure. No, I have a very good friend. He doesn't make any bones about it. His family's been involved in politics. He says, you just have to figure out what it's going to cost and if it's worth it and if you can make money. You know, he didn't do it. He's fine. But he had relatives who just basically made a calculation of what I have to pay to get elected and then how much I can make once I'm elected.
That's right. Well,
and it's just a business decision.
Exactly. It's a business decision. So this is democracy for you. You know?
Well, it's not in all countries. I can't say that every single person that I've ever met who's gone into politics does this, but there does seem to be an increasing number. You look at the people who are still surrounding Trump, who've said horrible things about him in private, but then in public say he's the greatest thing since sliced cheese and canned beer.
There's a variation on the theme. There's a variation on the theme. In poor countries like India, it's basically, okay, how much do I have to spend to buy the votes? Once I get the votes, how much can I make in the process? Mm-hmm. But in Western democracies, in the more advanced democracies, it's not quite that way. Yeah. It's much more sophisticated. I think it's you hire politicians to do
your dirty work.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, it becomes one way of making money.
That's right.
Yeah, I don't work. I mean, who was the fellow? He was head of commerce, I believe. Wilbur Ross?
Oh, Wilbur Ross.
Yes.
Oh, boy.
He made his money but the old-fashioned way. He got the U.S. government to put tariffs on steel. He just happened to have a steel company.
That's right. But the other part, this was disclosed actually when he was nominated to be the Secretary of Commerce. He was the vice chairman of a bank in the Mediterranean.
No, not just the Mediterranean. It was Cyprus.
It was in Cyprus, Bank of Cyprus.
Interesting group of clients, all Russian.
All Russian oligarchs was laundering their money through Cyprus.
I know, but I mean, it just doesn't seem to matter what you've done. I mean, Donald Trump, I mean, despite his bankruptcies, what he did to Atlantic City, the poor schlubs who worked for him, who got stiffed. By schlubs, I mean the poor working men who were not paid, and their businesses that had to go bankrupt because he got them to do work and then he refused to pay them or paid them, a fraction of what the
This comes to the other
done.
question about democracy. I think if you can buy votes in India, it means the voters either don't care or are not sophisticated. Mm-hmm. The other issue about democracy is exactly that. Who is casting the vote? Do they really know what's going on? Or do they care?
Yeah, but we can't say democracy is all bad. There are elements to it. And if people are willing
to really commit to it.
To commit to their society.
That's right.
It works very well.
That's
but in
right.
the absence of that, it's just ruled by the mob.
That's right.
However they feel.
In countries like the Scandinavian countries, we have a population of 3 million, 5 million.
It's not working so well there right now. Right now they're having real culture shock. Denmark wants to reverse a lot of the immigration they had because of crime.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not because they have a change of heart. It's because circumstances have changed. A lot of the groups that they brought in have brought in trouble because they have not assimilated. They wanted to keep, in essence, their culture and bring it to Denmark and have Denmark recognize it. And the same in Sweden, a little less in Norway. But let's go on to the global south. I'm thinking about the world these days in terms of, you have North America, which is less and less Mexico, more and more US and Canada. And then you have Europe, whatever that means. And then you have Asia, which is, in my mind, China and ASEAN, and Japan and South Korea, all of these places, right? And then you have the rest of the global south, South America, Africa, Middle East, the stands. And when we're talking about these, I want to keep these kind of as our way of referencing it. So Global South, and I'm going to include this time ASEAN. ASEAN supported China on the Taiwan issue. They said, don't bring...
And the Middle East too.
Don't bring Ukraine to Asia.
That's right.
Yeah. But the BRICS are expanding. All right?
And SCO.
And SCO. Do you see parallels in that?
Oh, absolutely. BRICS are expanding, and I was really amazed.
5 more countries, potentially. There's only 5 members now. If they bring in these 5 other countries, including some very populated ones.
Including some very wealthy ones, very high GDP ones, like Saudi
Arabia. Does this de facto replace the G7?
It doesn't replace the G7. It
comes
becomes
as a counterweight.
Counterweight.
Yeah.
Because just BRICS alone, BRICS isn't the only thing. Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
Yeah. SCO.
SCO. There are 5 or 6 countries looking to join as well, to expand massively. So I think the Global South is realizing that they cannot count on the Global North.
Or are they finding their own voice in a time of superpowers having issues?
But superpowers having these issues, they also know very well to join BRICS or join SCO, in effect, is a slap on the U.S. face.
Well, it also it's more than just a slap. The BRICS is developing their own financial network.
That's right.
They have their own bank.
Transfer.
They have their own ways. If you join, it's an insurance policy against a run on your currency money, and potentially could be the basis of an international exchange system.
It'll be a while, but
it'll be a while. But I mean, it's just you start to see this. There seems to be nervousness about the reliability of the U.S.
Well, it's not nervousness. I will put it much more strongly, is that reliability of the U.S., their reputation worldwide, even in Europe, has gone down so much.
Okay, would you say that the United States is a rogue nation by its actions, breaking all of these compacts?
Breaking everything they commit to, time and again.
But why are we just talking about this now? Because of China and what they're doing in terms of this?
Because of China.
But the fact is, it was there before. I mean,
they've been doing it for quite some time.
Yeah, and this is with friend or foe alike. Unilateral tariffs is things. Now, you talk about autocracy. The definition of autocracy is when one rules other arbitrarily without regard to the rule of law.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that can apply to an individual, but it can also apply to a country.
Yeah.
Question, has the United States, by virtue of the fact that it changes its policies,
there's a difference,
become an autocratic country?
I think there is a difference from our days in the 60s and 70s, where there was something that was driving American society toward equality, toward fairness.
There was a hope, but at the same time, we were doing terrible things in South America.
And Southeast Asia.
Yeah. So it seems like everything seems to be a continuous muddle.
Yeah.
But right now, direction doesn't seem to be going the right way. So you wouldn't say that, you'd say that the U.S. is a rogue nation.
Absolutely, it's a rogue nation.
I'd agree. Well, I think we've talked about as much as we can talk about in the last hour or so. So we're going to call it quits. But next week, we're going to have a very special guest.
Yes. Very special indeed.
Bernhard Schwartlander, who was the number 2 at the WHO, chef de cabinet for the last 4 years. Ironically, as he will tell us, he wrote the pandemic plan before the pandemic occurred, never thinking that they would have to use the plan. But he's now here in China. He's the world ambassador, the world envoy of the WHO, and he's chosen to be based in China. And I think we're going to have a really good discussion.
Yes, it'll be very interesting.
In addition to being an expert, he's really one of the nicest and most intelligent people I know.
Absolutely.
Yeah. He also has some theories about the problems with the world today and these kind of false equivalencies. Especially, it's a projection of what he ran into with COVID-19, where people say it's either A or B, but that's not exactly how the way things work.
That's right. He described it as neither A nor B. False dichotomy, did he call it?
False dichotomy, yeah. Well, we'll learn about more of that next year. Until then, as always,
take care.
Take care.